Hi, I'm Rainer, and welcome to my train room. Today, I decided that I would do a kind of an extreme budget locomotive paint and DCC install, and well, we'll see what happens with it. So this is a little Athearn blue box switcher. Comes in a little blue box like this. I picked this up at a train show last year for $5, and of course, it's DC only. It was unpainted. It was just a black, undecorated shell. And looking at the wheels and the motor, it looks like it's been run a little bit, but basically a brand new locomotive, and just as built from Athearn. It comes with a bag with the window glass in it, but all the railings are missing. But that's okay. The railings are just wire along the side and the railings at the end, so I think I can make those up. And so what I'm going to do is I am going to paint it for Algoma Central Railway. Now, I've done this already years ago with another identical locomotive that I bought brand new many years ago. So this one is the ACR number 140. I know it's not the exact correct model for what they ran, but close enough. So they had two switchers like this, 140 and 141. So I'm going to paint this one up to be 141. And this model, it's the exact same model. This model was actually missing, like I said, it's missing the railings and appears to be missing the bell and the horn for the front. So I'm going to have to figure out what I'm doing with that and just find some parts or make some parts or whatever for that. So I'm not too worried about it. So there's going to be a couple of things I need to do with this. One is to finish the painting and then do the lettering on it. And then the other part is the electrical stuff to make it DC, to convert it to DCC. So I've already painted what they call the CP Tuscan Red. It actually looks like almost like a dark purple on here, just because of the lighting. But it's the exact same paint that I have on that, same brand, same everything. And I painted that already because I was using that color for painting another train car a couple of months ago. So I knew I was going to be doing this, so I just sprayed that on the sides. What I need to do next is mask out the front and spray the yellow. So yeah, I've got to mask it out and paint the yellow on these front corners. The rest of these lines are actually from a lettering set, a decal set. But I'll have to paint this yellow curved at the front and then mask the whole thing out and paint the gray at the top. That's going to be the next steps on the body shell, just doing the masking and the painting. So I'll do the yellow first and then I'll mask it out and paint the whole gray at the top. So that's one thing. And then for the DCC, I think I'll just do a quick review of how these Athearn blue boxes are made. They're kind of an ingenious design because when they assemble them, there is no soldering, there are no wires, and they work pretty well for an inexpensive locomotive. And in a DC locomotive, I think the easiest way to explain it is have the locomotive facing me away from me. So this is the front of the locomotive. And so when you're running a train down a track on DC, going forward, the right rail is positive, the left rail is negative. And the way it works on these Athearn blue box locomotives is there are these metal pieces coming up from each of the trucks that have an electrical connection to the right side wheels, so the right rail. So the positive power when you're going forward is coming up these metal things, and then it makes contact with this little metal strip as well as this copper strip going to the back of the headlight bulb, and that provides the positive power feed to the headlight bulb as well as to one side of the motor. So remember, the top of the motor needs to have positive going to it when the locomotive is going forward. For the negative, which is fed in from the bottom of the motor, they just use the metal chassis as the conductor, and the trucks have a little metal plate down there that makes contact with the metal frame of the locomotive, and so this is the negative conductor, makes contact with the bottom of the motor. Now, when you're putting a DCC decoder in a locomotive, the motor needs to be isolated from the chassis, or isolated from the power supply coming from the track is really the important factor, because the decoder is going in to the, electrically is being inserted into the path between the motor and the trucks, or the power from the rails. So in a DC locomotive, when you're going forward, this side's positive, this side's negative, and when you switch polarity, this side becomes positive, this side becomes negative, and the motor spins the other way. In DCC, we have the same constant power in the tracks all the time, and the decoder is what switches the polarity to the motor and provides it power to go either forwards or in reverse. So we need to electrically isolate this motor from the chassis. So that requires disassembling the whole locomotive and isolating this motor from the chassis. So for the decoder in this locomotive, I'm just going to use one of these inexpensive LaisDCC decoders. This one, I actually had it previously installed in another locomotive that then I put sound into. I have some more of these, but this is already in an open from the package, so I'll use this. These are perfectly good decoders in my experience. I think I paid around 20 bucks for this thing. I bought it on AliExpress. And so I'm going to be installing this in there, and the LEDs for lighting. So I've got these 3mm warm white round LEDs, and they are almost the perfect diameter to fit into the light housings at the end of this locomotive. So I'm going to put those in, and because they're LEDs running off DCC, I'm going to need to use a resistor for each of them. And these LEDs, I don't remember the price of them, but they're probably something like 30 cents each or less. And these resistors, I buy a pack of 100 now, and they end up costing me, I don't know, maybe 5 cents each. So the lighting is very, very inexpensive. So to take this apart, the first thing to do is just take the light off of it. I'm not going to be using it, so I'll get rid of that. And then the next step is to pop the trucks out of the thing. The trucks on these come off pretty easily. You just take these plastic clips off, and then the worm gear and what drive shaft there is comes out of it. I will just use this little container for my parts. So I can do that at both ends. And just remember, when you take the trucks out of these, it's pretty easy to remember. You can tell what the front end of the locomotive is because there's this light bracket here, and the trucks have the metal bracket coming up from the right side. So if you try to mix them up, you'll notice that because it'll be on the wrong side. The next step is to pull the motor out of this thing, and well, that's going to be fun. The motor mounts on this thing are old and brittle, and so I just cracked one of them. Yeah, so when I pulled the motor out, probably should have pushed up from the bottom, but the plastic is very, very brittle. I will just have to replace those motor mounts. I think I have more. If not, I can 3D print some. So the electrical contact, going back to it, the positive lead going forward, so from the right rail, comes up through these metal things, goes through this metal strap, makes contact with the motor there. The bottom comes up, this metal chassis is energized. It makes contact with these metals, these two copper tabs down here, and that feeds the bottom of the motor. So going forward, that would be the negative lead going in here. So what we need to do now is isolate this thing so that the connection is broken between the motor and the chassis. So on the top, that's pretty easy. We just take this metal strap off. And now the easiest thing that I have found with these, and remember, you got to be really careful with these because if you pop these copper straps off without being careful, the brushes are inside with the little spring, and they'll go flying across the room. And they are one of those little things that you can never find when they disappear. So you got to be very careful with it, and hopefully it doesn't fly out. If you take it off very slowly, it doesn't bounce up. And then take the other one off. Hopefully I can do this without causing a big problem. Now these copper straps, other than the tab sticking out, are the same. So what I do is I take the top one and put it on the bottom, making sure I don't lose the parts. Like as you notice, I've been holding the spring in with my finger. Take the bottom one and hook it back onto the top. Carefully push it down. And now what I have is a place to attach a wire up here, and this no longer has the copper tab sticking down to make contact with the chassis. What I'll do is I'll put some electrical tape down here to further isolate it, and then that will isolate the motor from the chassis. And then up here I can run the orange wire from the decoder will run to this. The gray wire from the decoder will run to this bottom copper strap. So that's how the decoder will actually be wired into this thing. And I just noticed that I lost the spring. Just like that. Fortunately, it didn't fly out, and it just is laying on the workbench. So theoretically, at this point, the DCC conversion itself is done. The rest of these wires are all going to go into the body shell for lights. The blue will be the common positive for both lights. The white will be the negative for the front light. Yellow will be the negative for the rear light. The green and purple wires, because I don't have more lights on this locomotive, won't be used, but if I had ditch lights or anything like that, that's what I would use those for. As you can see, I've got the red, black, gray, and the orange hooked up. So let's turn the locomotive so it's facing away from me so we can see the front of it here. What I've done is run a jumper wire from the top bar here, which is the right-hand pickup from the front truck, to the right-hand pickup from the rear truck. And then I've taken the red wire from the decoder and attached it here as well. So that is the right rail power to the decoder. And then for the negative, I've just decided to go straight to the metal truck, so I'm not relying on the moving contact point between the truck and the chassis. I've soldered a black wire on there, and because it's difficult to solder with everything in place, I soldered it with the truck out of the chassis, popped this truck in, and then ran the wire back out through the bottom of the chassis and then soldered it to this one. That's why this black one's a little bit extra long. I would have liked it to be shorter, but it makes it really difficult to solder. And then the black wire from the decoder also connects to the same point on the rear truck. So the left rail power is coming up from the front truck to the rear truck, and then from the rear truck goes up through the black wire to the decoder. I've got some heat shrink here that I can kind of slide down if I want to, and just kind of tie these wires together. I put it on there beforehand just in case, because I wasn't sure how it's going to be to keep the two wires away from the drive shaft. I think that's the trickiest part in these, is you want to try to make sure that your wires are not getting wrapped into the drive shafts. The orange wire, which is the positive when you're going forward for the motor, is going to this top here. I originally soldered on the other one because I didn't look carefully enough at what was the front and the rear, and I want everything to go to the rear because the decoder is going to end up in the cab, because this hood on these is very small. If you look at the hood on it, there's not a lot of room in there, and it gets very narrow back here, just kind of right behind this flywheel. So I want everything kind of going backwards. So that's what's happening with this. So that's the point I've got it to at this point. Obviously, like I said, I've got to finish painting the body shell, putting the lights in it, and then I will be connecting the rest of this. But at this point, the orange goes to the top of the motor, the gray goes down here to the bottom, as you saw earlier in the video where I soldered it on. And now I'm going to put it on the tracks and just like this, put it on the tracks and see if it works, to make sure I don't have any shorts or anything like that in it, because it's really easy to overlook something and not realize that something's touching where it shouldn't be. The only place that can sometimes, the biggest issue is sometimes this bottom wire going to the bottom of the motor, if you're not careful, can be making contact with the chassis, but it looks like it's okay. So I'm going to put it on the tracks, test it, and just make sure that I can actually program it and that it runs okay on DCC. Then I can continue with all the work on the body shell. So let's see how this works out. So at this point, I have the chassis ready to go. The wiring for the decoder is all done for the power part of it, and the only thing left to do is the lights. For the body shell, I got the rest of the painting done. So as I started out in the video, I had already painted this this Tuscan color. It's a CP Tuscan that I used. It's a scale coat paint. I sprayed that on ages ago when I was painting something else with the same color and I had the airbrush going. So I painted that. And then now I just painted this yellow part in the front. I masked it and painted it with a brush because it was such a small area. It wasn't worth getting the airbrush up and running for it. And then once that had dried and cured, I masked out the yellow and the Tuscan color and painted the top gray up the front air intakes in the grill, and the top of it in the cab I painted with the gray. Now these running boards on the side and these steps on the front here still need a coat of black on them. But before I do that, I am going to start doing the lettering for them. And I have a set of these old Herald King decals for the Algoma Central Railway, and this is actually an unopened complete set, so I will be able to use those. The lettering basically ends up looking like this. So I've got to put the logos on them on the sides of the cab. So once I put the yellow lines on and put the numbering and the Algoma Central lettering on it, then I will be ready to install the lighting. So there's going to be an LED going in the front here, an LED in the back. I'm probably going to black out the windows because the decoder is going to end up in the top of the cab. Now I'm going to pop this cab off of here because it will be easier to get the yellow lines put in here on the sides and everything else, because when the cab is attached, you're trying to tuck it down into the corner, and sometimes it's hard to get them to stay nice and straight. But because I've already got it painted, it was better to leave it on while I did the painting, because that way I can get to make sure that this division line between the side here and the gray is lined up with the cab. It was better to leave it together while I painted and masked that. But now that I've got that line to work with for my yellow lines, it's easier to do it with the cab off. The other thing that happens with these locomotives is if you are trying to do a decoder install of one of these, the biggest thing that I've found that's a challenge with them is the lack of space where just ahead of the cab. If you look at the hood on the thing, I'm going to try to tuck these wires up in here. This is part of the issue with these locomotives in doing installs on them, is that there isn't a lot of room. There's room for the decoder itself in the cab, but if you notice this opening right here where the wires are coming from under the hood narrows so much. It gets narrow this way, and it also tapers down so that it's not very far from the flywheel. It's not very far from any of these moving parts. So you have to be careful when you're doing the wiring on these that you're not putting the wires in a spot where it's going to interfere with the movement of the truck, or the flywheel is going to hit them, or anything else. So at this point, all the wires that I have in there right now seem to be moving freely, but I still need to put the headlight up here. And one of the things that I try to do with the headlight, I did on the other one, is I run the wires up in the top corners of the hood all the way back, glue them in place so they come out right here. And then the final thing I will do is the decoder will go up in the cab here, and then I'll pop the cab on last, because it's just easier to get the wiring connections done with the cab off of the locomotive. The only things that need to be wired into the top of the cab are actually the rear light, but those wires will reach up, and then I can stuff the decoder up there and secure it in place. But these locomotives are really tight in this area coming in the back of the hood, because it narrows in every direction, and there's a flywheel sitting right inside there, so there's not a lot of room around. Anyway, I am going to pop this back off now and try to get the lettering all done on the locomotive, and then we can get around to getting the lights in place and getting it wired up and on the track. So I think I have it ready now, pretty much ready for the final assembly. So I got the lettering on here. First thing I did was, it's a water slide decals, so I just put in the bottom line in here on both sides. So I did one side at a time. So I put the line on the bottom. The next step was to put this yellow line at the top. Bottom, I just put it as tight as I could down to the bottom. On the top, I just put it along the line between the gray and the Tuscan on the side. And then just by eye, I put this center line that comes up here. And then I did it in that order because the Algoma Central needs to be centered between these two lines. So I need to have that center line in here to accurately judge that. So did that on one side. And then once it was all dry and I had all the lettering, I was happy with it on one side, then I did the other side. And the cab was a similar kind of thing. Did the yellow line at the top, did the yellow line at the bottom, put the Algoma Central logo on here, roughly centered with the windows, and then I centered the numbers 141 on there. When you're putting these water slide decals on, you need to get them positioned exactly where you want them to be, let them dry for a while, and once they're kind of dry in place, to get them to conform to the shape of the body and all the bumps and everything else in it, I put on some of this microscale microset. This is a bottle that I've had for many years because you don't use very much of it. You just use a little bit of you just take a little bit on a cotton swab and just dab it on there. And what it does is it softens up all the decal material and helps it conform to the body. So what I did was you put that on there, let it soak for a bit, and then I just push down with that cotton swab and just kind of push it into the cracks and the bumps and everything that's on the body. Once you put that stuff on there, though, you can't move it around because it gets so soft it will just break up all of the lettering on you. So you do the best you can with that, and then you let it dry thoroughly. And then once that was done, I gave it a couple of coats of this acrylic matte varnish. I've used Tester's Dull Coat in the past. This works fairly well. And that just kind of ties everything together and also means that your lettering isn't going to pop off when you start working on everything, because it just kind of coats everything and makes everything kind of an equivalent amount of shine. So did both sides of the locomotive plus the front and the back with these yellow stripes, and did the cab all the way around. And now I am trying to get it all back together. So what I did for the headlight was I used one of these little warm white LEDs that I showed you earlier in the video and soldered a 1K resistor to the negative lead. And from that, I put a white wire on here, and then the blue wire was soldered to the positive lead, and put the light in the hole, put a little super glue on it, left it sitting, and then I taped down the wires in the upper corners of the hood. Now, hopefully, that should keep those wires clear of any moving parts in here. And because I put them into the corners, it doesn't really take up space in the middle where the highest point is of everything that goes inside here. For the cab, I've also put in an LED in here. There's a yellow wire coming from the resistor that's on the negative lead, and a blue wire from the positive. Once I get this popped together, I'm going to put this body shell on here, and then I've got to connect the blue wires all to connect together, because there's the common positives, and the yellow needs to connect to the yellow, the white needs to connect to the white. And then I need to try to fit it all in here without it interfering with anything else. So let's see how I can get this all working. So the body shell is on, and as I mentioned earlier in the video, these locomotives are very tight for space in here. So you're kind of, yeah, this spot where all these wires come out is really kind of restricted. But that's what we've got to work with, so that's what we'll deal with. So now I need to try to untangle things a little bit. And so the green wire and the purple wire will not be used, and the blue wire on the decoder needs to connect to that, as well as it needs to connect to this. So I can shorten this one up a little bit. No sense having any wires any longer than necessary. Here I'm just putting some heat shrink on here. Got to heat it up, shrink it on there to make sure that these wires don't short out on anything. And the last connection will be the white wires. So let's get these relatively somewhat shorter anyway, because they don't need to be this long. Just remember, every wire that you have has to fit inside very limited space inside the locomotive. So the less wire you have to stuff in there, the easier it's going to be to fit it all in. These purple and green wires not going to be using those, so I'll cut them relatively short, but not off completely in case I change my mind later. There's still something to connect to. And now comes the fun part of stuffing all this in here in such a way that the locomotive will still function. So I have a functioning locomotive, DCC equipped, headlights, rear light works. Locomotive cost me $5, decoder around $20. Not a bad deal overall. I still need to finish the details on it. I got to put the couplers on it. I have to make up some railings for it, things like that. But it's running, runs just fine. And once I do all the details on it and get it weathered a little bit, it's going to be a good partner for my other switcher that I have for my yard here. So just a video to go over how you can get a inexpensive, very inexpensive DCC equipped locomotive for yourself. These Athearn blue box locomotives, they're not hard to switch to DCC. Really, the whole thing is about isolating the motor and making the wiring connections. In this one, it's a bit more challenging than in some of the larger locomotives, simply because there's not much room for wiring between the hood and the cab because it's pretty tight, but overall not terribly difficult. So hopefully this video is helpful to somebody. You know, if you're thinking of buying one of these locomotives or already have one and want to convert it to DCC, it's not a difficult thing to do. By the way, earlier in the video, if you saw when I popped the motor out, it's far safer to just push the motor out from the bottom rather than pull it up like I did. That was a bit, I guess, careless, and the old motor mounts were a little bit brittle and they cracked a bit. So what I ended up doing actually was just using some hot glue to reattach them to the motor. They were still clipping on, they just weren't staying attached to the motor. So I just put a little bit of hot glue in there and pushed it all back in and it was fine. Anyway, thank you for watching, and see you next time.